2 votes in 1 year, and Israel still can't form a government. The Prime Minister tried and failed. Now it's up to Benny Gantz. Can he form a coalition, or is the country destined for yet another election? I'm Imran Gata, and today's newsmaker is the political deadlock in Israel. For the first time in more than a decade, Benjamin Netanyahu is not the one tasked with forming Israel's government. That responsibility is now in the hands of Benny Gantz, a relative newcomer to Israeli politics. The leader of the Blue and White Alliance has the tough job of establishing a functioning coalition. Several political parties are already refusing to work with the former military chief. But hope is coming from an unlikely corner, a group of mainly Arab political parties known as the Joint List. In September, they threw their weight behind Gantz, hoping to end the Netanyahu era. But they don't seem to have much else in common. So even if they can form a government, will they be able to work together? Aida Touma-Sliman reports.
Can Benny succeed where Bibi failed? Benny Gantz, the former Israeli military chief, has been given 28 days to form a coalition. He's already reached the halfway mark.
Everyone expects us to bring the political chaos to an absolute end. Everyone demands us to allow the whole country to gradually return to a normal, functioning, safe and calm life routine. An entire country is awaiting a breath of relief.
Israel has been without a government for almost a year. Elections in April and September resulted in no outright winner. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave up last month, allowing his closest rival the chance to form a cabinet. Gantz heads the Blue and White Alliance, which has 44 seats in the 120-seat Knesset. The Prime Minister's bloc has 55. 61 seats are required for a simple majority. If Gantz is successful, he'll break Netanyahu's streak, who's Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister. The 70-year-old leader has been in charge since 2009, but also served a term in the 1990s. But there are few people who expect Gantz will succeed in breaking the political deadlock. And that's mainly due to this man, Avigdor Lieberman. His party, the far-right Israel Beitenu, has 8 seats and holds the balance of power. Lieberman has so far refused to join a coalition with either Netanyahu or Gantz. He won't back Gantz because he's supported by members of the Joint List, an alliance of Arab parties. Lieberman has called the Arab members of the Knesset enemies of Israel, and he won't support Netanyahu because the Prime Minister relies on ultra-Orthodox parties in his coalition. Israel's president has pushed for a unity government with a rotating premiership. Another option to break the deadlock will be to find a third candidate to form a coalition if Gantz fails. There's also the possibility of a third election, but it seems all parties want to avoid this. So what will happen once Gantz's 28 days are up and he fails to form a coalition? And what impact is the lack of a government having on Israeli society? Aida Touma-Sliman, The Newsmakers.
Let's go to West Jerusalem now, where we're joined by Eli Hazan. He's the Foreign Affairs Director for Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. Aida Touma-Sliman is a member of the Israeli Parliament for the Arab Joint List. And Mitchell Barak is a political analyst who served as a spokesman for former President Shimon Peres and for Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Good to have you all on the program. Eli Hazan, isn't Netanyahu to blame for this current situation? The country still can't form a government. It's because of him, isn't it?
No, it's not because of him. In fact, it's because of 2 main subjects. The first one is Avigdor Lieberman, who could join to Netanyahu in the previous election. He refused to, and Blue and White. They refused to accept what President Rivlin have already offered, and that is the main block for forming a coalition. We already accepted it.
Mitchell Barak, is Eli Hazan right?
Well,
Well, he's partially right. I think the first person to blame for this predicament is the Israeli voter. I mean, these are the results of the election. The people have spoken, and there seems to be a deadlock. But I think there's really two people who we can blame at this point for the fact that there's no government. The first is Benjamin Netanyahu, because Benjamin Netanyahu it's not just that he can't form the government, he also won't move over and let someone else form a government. Meaning, if someone else from the Likud could come in, there would be a government tomorrow. And also, Benjamin Netanyahu is to blame because Blue and White has already said they won't sit with him. Okay? The other person to blame is Benny Gantz. And the reason is because a lot of Israelis and a lot of members of Knesset don't yet see Benny Gantz as the leader of Israel. He can't just step in there. If he was a stronger candidate, maybe a little more charismatic, then he could form a government even with these numbers.
Aida Touma-Sliman, is the only reason you're keen on Benny Gantz is because he's not Benjamin Netanyahu? Is that it? Beyond that, you don't have anything in common?
We are not leaning on anybody. We recommended to the president because we believe that we need to end Netanyahu's era. We think that Netanyahu was leading this country and both people to a catastrophe, politically and internal issue and democratically. So we needed to end this era, and that's why we recommended. Beyond that, I think that we are very far from giving any support to any government that will be formed in the next, in this time. Because the options and the possibilities are very far off what we believe a government should be like. If it is a unity government between Likud, Israel Beitenu, Lieberman meaning, and Gantz, or if it is a government that is leaning on Lieberman and maybe another part of the parties who are in the right-wing camp. Mm-hmm. In any situation, we can't see ourselves supporting such kind of governments.
Let's have a little listen to Benjamin Netanyahu talking about the possibility of a coalition that is not his to put together. Have a listen.
After we established a right-wing bloc, only two options are left. Either a government under my leadership or a dangerous government dependent on the Arab parties. At this time, more than ever, especially with the tremendous security challenges we face, a government reliant on the Arab anti-Zionist parties must not be formed. We will make every effort to prevent the creation of this dangerous government.
Hearing Avigdor Lieberman say things like the Arab parties are a fifth column, but isn't Benjamin Netanyahu essentially saying the same thing here? This is scaremongering, isn't it?
Yes, of course.
This is for Eli Hazan. Aida, this is for Eli Hazan. Eli?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Eli.
Sorry.
Yeah. Can you repeat the question?
Netanyahu's scaremongering, right? He's also saying that the Arab parties are a fifth column here, and that he's creating this boogeyman of the left wing and the Arabs together that are going to sort of eat up Israel.
No, not at all. Not at all. You have to understand, we are doing a division between the Arab society and Israel. If you check the facts, our government invested 15 billion shekels approximately in the Arab society in order to integrate it into the Israeli society. And MKs like Aida Touma-Sliman, they are supporters of terrorism, and therefore they are illegit in our point of view. More than that, ask yourself how come inside Blue and White, MKs is resisting to a coalition with the Arab parties. It is very important to make it clear. Now, one more thing, I want to refer to what Mitchell has said. We voted for Netanyahu. The Likud members have voted for Netanyahu. There is a bloc of 55 supporting Netanyahu. In that regard, Netanyahu is not the obstacle for the coalition.
Aida?
Well, I think that Netanyahu and people like Eli Cohen are the terrorists in this region, and not Aida Touma-Sliman, who is supporting a terror. He cannot sit there and say it very bluntly that they differentiate between our people and us. I am the representative of the Arab community. I think it was very clear in the last election. This incitement that has been led by Netanyahu in the last 5 years at least, against the Arab population, Palestinian population in Israel, and against MKs should get into an end. And this is by going to a government that do not include Netanyahu in any way. Netanyahu will be on trial very soon and will end up in jail. And I will continue to represent my own people, and I will continue to struggle for peace and equality for the two people of this country.
Okay, and we're going to get to the corruption indictment possibilities soon, but I want to ask Mitchell Barak, is this a tone of incitement from Netanyahu? It's either me or the terrorists.
Yes, I think it's a horrible form of incitement, and I think the irony here, the ironic thing is one of Netanyahu's greatest contributions, I believe, to Israeli democracy is actually this little Arab Spring that is taking place, that actually the Israeli Arabs in Israel, who represent 20% of the population, came out and voted. 60% of them came out to vote, and they actually recommended someone to be Prime Minister of Israel, which they hadn't done. I think they only did one time before. So Israeli Arabs are ready to get involved more in Israeli government. We did a poll among Israeli Arabs where we found 50% of Israeli Arabs were willing to join a government, and another 30% were willing to support a government from the outside. So you have a clear majority of Israeli Arabs that are ready to participate. And part of that is being driven by the hateful speech, the incitement, calling, if it is true that these members of Knesset and the party are supporters of terrorism, they wouldn't be allowed to run in the Knesset. It's that simple. They wouldn't be allowed, they would be banned from running. So if there's real evidence to connect them to terrorists, then you should speak up. But if there's not, you're disenfranchising 20% of the population, and it doesn't look good for democracy. Meaning Israel likes to pride itself on the fact that it is the only democracy in the Middle East. That's great. But you can't have a democracy and then disenfranchise 20% of the population. It's hateful rhetoric. It's done to drive and get out the vote and get those right-of-center people out there to vote against the Arabs. How could the leader of the people of Israel, 9 million people of Israel, the prime minister, he represents the people of Israel. He is a prime minister for every single citizen here. How could he say that a government that is based on, 2 million Israeli Arab citizens is not a legitimate one? That's a terrible thing to say.
Eli Hazan, I'm curious to know your response to Mitchell's point that unwittingly, by demonizing the Arab-Israeli population, Netanyahu might be galvanizing them and politicizing them and getting them involved in the political process. What do you think?
The question was for me?
Yes, Eli. I know we have issues with audio here, but if you could hear the question, go ahead.
I tell you what, it is completely untrue, because as I told you in the first time, we're making a big division between the Arab MKs who support terrorism. More than that, I want to ask people like Mitchell and Aida. In Likud, we have Muslim members. In Likud, we have a lot of Central Committee members, Muslims. So we are not that racist, but we put the finger on the people like Aida Touma-Sliman, like Ahmed Tibi, who's been very supportive of terrorism, and we are making it very clear. And I want to emphasize again, not every government in the state of Israel have invested in the Arab population like Netanyahu's government. Moreover, I want to speak about one more thing. There is a tent now next to the Knesset of a protest against the violence in the Arab society. It is led by Arab MKs and Arab mayors. The main target is the Israeli government, who already invested a lot of fund in order to fight against violence. And if I will ask Aida Touma-Sliman whether she is condemned any kind of violence that comes from their society, she will be very not unclear about it.
Okay, something that's interesting, Aida, is that Eli refers to your society as something that's somewhat separate from the rest of Israeli society. Am I reading too much into that, or is that just the way things are?
Well, I think that it is very clear now who is following the master of incitement in this dialogue. Master of incitement is Mr. Bibi Netanyahu, and he has been doing this in every election. He started that in 2015 when he said that the Arabs are coming in droves, come and rescue the elections. And this time, by different declarations he made before the election and in the election day, when he tried to emphasize as if we are stealing the elections and we are doing frauds through the elections. And the people have gave him the right answer by coming out and voting mainly for us, electing us. So whoever wants to speak to the majority of the population, of the Arab population, should speak to us because we are the representatives. And this big lie talking about that the government invested way beyond. Whatever is invested in money and in budgets in the last 4 years, it is not even bridging the 10% of the gap that was created over the years because of policies of discrimination against our own people. The real budget that was invested, it was supposed to be 2.5 million beyond the origin budget that is usually given to our society. The extra money that was invested is 2.5, and out of it was supposed to be 1.5 for the police in order to fight violence, and it was taken back by the government at the end of the year. So there is no illusion in the fact that it is used. This discriminatory policy is used also to incite against the population.
Okay, and I want to talk about the corruption charges in a moment or two with Mitchell and Eli and Aida, you as well. But on this point, Aida, I want to ask you something about what this means broadly, more broadly for the Palestinians, beyond the Arab citizens of Israel proper, the Palestinians who live under occupation in the West Bank, besieged in Gaza. There's a school of thought that says, well, Netanyahu's so far right that Gantz just looks like a centrist because of how far right Netanyahu is. And when it comes to issues of the occupation or the Palestinians living under occupation, there will be no difference between the two. As an Arab MK, how do you feel about that?
I can read the map very clearly, exactly like the other Palestinians who can see it. If we are talking about the major issue that exists in this country and that is influencing the whole aspects of life, is the continuous occupation of the Palestinian territory and the fact that Israel is still putting the Palestinian people under occupation and oppression. This is the main issue that should lead in creating alternatives to what is existing today. And for my regret, Gantz is not creating any alternative in this issue. He is also talking about annexing the big settlements blocks. He is talking about keeping the Jordanian Valley under Israeli sovereignty. So he is also in the issue of Jerusalem, almost in the same situation like Netanyahu. So what is the difference? Is the fact that he is willing to start negotiation. Under this situation, he is starting a negotiation for the sake of negotiation. He has to clearly set out a different guideline for his policies in order to convince that he is an alternative to the occupation policy.
Okay, so Mitchell, Barak, with that in mind, is it status quo no matter who becomes prime minister, whether Benny Gantz or Benjamin Netanyahu, when it comes to the occupation?
Well, again, I mean, you know, Israel is really involved in defending itself at this point and security. The citizens, as we speak about so nonchalantly about Gaza, there's been a barrage of rockets from there this weekend in Ashdod and Ashkelon. So you have residents that are, you know, can't really go about their normal routine and can't really live properly. So it's nice to really, talk, and I quote, the occupation. But Israel, to the best of my knowledge, when I was working with Prime Minister Shimon in about 2003, withdrew from there a little afterwards. So there's no real Jewish presence there.
I said occupation of the West Bank
and kites, flaming kites.
Gaza. Yeah.
And it's not. Well, you're talking about Gaza. We can move to that as well. But
sure.
Gaza. If the Gaza border would be quiet, then there would really be maybe something to talk about with Gantz. But Gantz was, was the commander-in-chief, the chief of staff of the war that took place between Israel and Gaza. So, we don't have quiet. We have terror. We have Israeli citizens being killed. We have Israeli citizens under attack. To a certain extent, that's the case in the West Bank, where you have a large Israeli population living, and you have Abu Mazen, who's a leader of the Palestinians, who very much seems to support terror with the one hand and sometimes condemn it with the other hand, pays for terrorists on the basis of how many Jews they kill and pay their families. President Abbas, we're talking about forming a government. I think he's in the 13th year of his 4-year term. He's a dictator, and the Palestinian people deserve better leadership that's going to really deal with Israel and really represent their interests, because they're really not going anywhere with this leadership. And if they continue to support terror or not fight it, it's really not going to get any better, and it's going to cause the Israeli side to talk about annexation, cause the Israeli side to talk about what they can do to protect their citizens.
And this is interesting because
the land they want.
Yeah, you and Ida agreed on a lot of other things, but it's interesting to see that the fundamental disagreement on this issue, which is revealing in itself in terms of Gantz's perspective and Netanyahu's being quite similar when it comes to the Palestinians. I want to ask you, Eli Hazan, about the indictment for corruption. Does Netanyahu need a third election and for this whole process to keep rolling along to make it easier for him to defend himself against those charges, because it's much sweeter and easier when you're prime minister, right?
For us, this is something which is very principled. You have to understand the political fight between left and right in Israel. The left cannot defeat the right wing in Israel because of the policy. They failed in security, they failed in economy, and therefore they need to find a better alternatives in order to defeat Netanyahu. For instance, Blue and White, although they consist of a lot of leftist members, they do not define themselves as left because they're afraid of, of what it creates. For us, Netanyahu is under a political persecution, and we are not willing to give up because it is not about Netanyahu. It's about us.
But are you saying the Supreme Court is controlled by left-wingers?
It's about the new elite of the state of Israel. Of course, no doubt about it. The majority of the Supreme Court was determined by the former president Aaron Barak. Until in the last years, we are trying to change the frame of the Supreme Court, but no doubt about it. You can see the decisions, you can see the damages that the Supreme Court had done to the state of Israel, and I don't want to blame them for something which is bad. This is their ideology. We have a different ideology. We are calling upon, a representation. The Supreme Court in Israel were not elected by the people, and we are calling only to bring democracy back.
Okay, and this is interesting. Mitchell, Barak, very briefly, I don't have much time left, so in less than 30 seconds, please, your response to that. The Supreme Court is a bunch of leftists.
Well, I know, and the British are still here. I mean, the Likud membership loves to hear that the country is still controlled by the academia, the left, and so forth. Well, surprised. The Likud has been in power basically since 1977, since Menachem Begin. So we can't keep complaining. They can't keep complaining that it's run by leftists. And, it's a conspiracy against the right wing. And to say, actually, which is what Netanyahu said before, that they're doing damage to the state of Israel. What country do you hear that the Supreme Court of the land, which is supposed to protect the rights of minorities, which is supposed to protect the laws, which is supposed to be somewhat impartial, although everyone can have a legal opinion, and they decide things in 3 judges, in 7 judges, that they're doing damage to the state of Israel, to the security of the state of Israel, is preposterous.
Okay.
But these are the kind of messages that the Prime Minister is actually saying, and it's damaging to democracy.
Mitchell, Ida, and Eli, I'm out of time. It's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thank you. Thanks for watching The Newsmakers. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.